Sawadee Cup and hello and welcome to Basic Black with Victor Black. Today's video has two purposes. The first of which is to provide approximately 2 hours of free educational content on training and nutrition and an introduction to performance enhancing drugs for beginner trainers. And the second purpose is to act as an understanding for people that are interested in my Victor Black's masterclass, what we actually cover in that class. So even though we're presenting about approximately 2 hours of content today, the concept of the masterclass is we pick up in the masterclass where we leave off today. So we're going to talk about training principles today. The masterclass extends that. We're going to talk about nutritional principles today. The masterclass extends that. We're going to talk about performance enhancing drugs today, at least an introduction to the high level concepts. And of course, the masterclass picks up from that. So it's quite a lot of content. I understand 2 hours is quite a body of work, but it's important, I think, that we don't delude ourselves into misunderstanding that the process of creating a quality physique, we're not talking about general population here. We're talking about guys that want to get into performance-based training, bodybuilding training, physique development training. It is far more complicated than simply eat, rest, repeat, eat, rest, repeat. There, certainly is a case to be made that it's not rocket science, and I agree wholeheartedly. And we're going to talk about that in detail in today's video. But there is, at the very minimum, some principles, some frameworks that we need to adhere to if we hope to get a good return from our investment. So let's get started with understanding why I decided to call this video Basic Black. And really what it comes down to is the fact that there's so much information in the marketplace today. There's so many topics of discussion that for people that are new to this space, it literally can be overwhelming. A lot of guys come to me and they go, you know what, I don't know where to start, and more importantly, I don't know who to believe. It seems that every single person that I speak to has a different opinion, and they all seem to be successful. They all have their own sort of unique success track record. They look good. Perhaps they're competing. Perhaps they're doing coaching and they're on successful coaching businesses. But there's all this conflicting and at times confusing information in the market. So let me explain to you why that is first, because once you understand why it's so confusing, it makes it a lot easier to understand what we should actually be focusing on and concentrating. The reason that the educational information about bodybuilding, training, nutrition, performance enhancing drugs is so complicated and at sometimes so contradictory to itself is very, very simple. And that is, you have to understand the underlying business model behind this industry. The business model that has driven this industry for the last 50, 60 years, and it started with the magazines back in the 1940s. They had, in the health and strength type magazines, is subscription based. And what subscription based business models mean is that every month the magazines needed to sell you a new copy of their magazine. January, February, March, all the way through December. And then guess what? Next year it started again. And so it became almost cultural that they needed to come up with something new to say every month. Well, I'm just being honest. That's the blunt reality of it. When you sell a framework that someone can pick up and walk away with, and we're going to basically explain what that framework is in today's video, how do you make money next month? It's very challenging things. Okay, so I want to explain to you the realities of this is what you need to do. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. You need to focus on these fundamental principles and that you'll get success. What do I say to you next month or the month after that? Or more importantly, what do I say to you in 5 years from now? I quite honestly need to keep making up new shit. That's the truth. That's the cold, hard, ugly reality of this business, and that is the business that drives the industry has to keep making up new shit so that they can keep selling their magazines. Now today, 2017, yes, we have moved online. We live in a digital world today, but the model still applies. Most of the businesses that are in the education and information distribution business in fitness and bodybuilding are still today subscription based. So in other words, they need your eyeballs on their site every day or every week so that they can sell you to advertisers. That's the business they're in. They're not in the business of giving you a body of information and you go away and you execute it. That's not their business model. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not being overly critical of the business model behind the industry. It's just important that you understand what it is. Once you understand what the business model is, you start to go, okay, so I understand how they make money, and therefore I need to understand that they need to keep making new shit up. No wonder it's so confusing. Every month it's a different approach. Every month it's a different article. Every month it's a different, routine or this and that. It's change. Because if they simply said the same thing every day, every week, every month, year after year after year, you would stop giving them money. And that's the truth. And that's why it's so bloody confusing. The second part of the business model, I just want to explain, and this is specific to performance enhancing drugs, and we're going to get onto that in video 4, is you have to understand that most people in this business think that the more you appear to know, the more credible you must be. And this is an example of that type of resource. So I'm not particularly picking on this resource. There are a number of resources in the market like this. And basically what you would consider them to be is like a reference book. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of compounds that they basically talk about in some detail, not great level of detail, some detail. But it's more like an encyclopedia than it is a practical hands-on how-to. Most guys are never going to actually buy and use more than 10 or 12 compounds in their whole life. That's it. Most guys, all they need are basic compounds. And yet you have books like this that cover hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different, compounds. And although I find them fascinating, do I own a copy of this book? Yes. Would I recommend that advanced trainers buy a copy of this book? Yes. Is it confusing for beginners? Absolutely. Profoundly so. Because you just look at it and you go, holy crap, right? Like, why is it so confusing? Because these guys want to be presented, they want to represent themselves as gurus. I know everything there is to know about steroids, right? And look at my body of proof. It's overwhelmingly complicated because it's done that way by design. And it doesn't need to be that way. And the way that I like to help guys out is to explain, you know what, if you're interested in performance enhancing drugs, you need to know about 6 or 7 things well for the first year. That's all you need to know. And we're going to talk about exactly what those things are in video 4. You don't need to know about obscure research chemicals that, didn't exist until a few years ago. The fundamentals that have been with us since Arnold's days are still the fundamentals that you are going to get the biggest bang for your buck from. 80% of the return is going to come from a handful of compounds used in very basic ways. So the last thing I want to mention before we get into the content itself is the concept of Chinese whispers. And this is a huge problem that a lot of guys just don't understand about this business, and that is, I know a lot of very experienced guys in this field. I'll be honest with you, they don't spend their time on Facebook groups and forum groups trying to help beginners. They do one of two things. Either they're in the gym training, that's the thing that primarily drives them, or alternatively they want to charge for their money. And I say, why not? And if they've developed a expertise over the last decade of use and experience and research, then they want to get paid for their time. So what happens with most experts in this field, and I know a lot of them, and if you know one, talk to them, they'll give you the same feedback, because most of us at some point try to help for free. at some point. And they go onto the forums, they go into the groups, and you end up in these, silly debates with silly people, and you get frustrated by the process. And most guys just give up in the end and go, fuck it, walk away. That's the truth. And they tend to focus their time then on just trying to help people that that respect their expertise and are willing to contribute financially to learning themselves. So what that means is that probably more than any other industry in the world, the information distribution that happens online is done in a Chinese whisper form. One guy who actually knows what he's talking about tells another guy, who tells another guy, who tells another guy. And by the time it gets down 4 or 5 layers deep and you read it online in a group or a forum, the guy's really just copying and pasting. And God, if he picked it up and copied and pasted it, it might actually resemble what the first guy said. But he retypes it, he uses his own words, he puts his own spin on it, and you end up with these just twisted messages that are completely devoid of reality and fact. That's just the truth about what happens online. I'm by no means arrogant enough to say that there aren't really super smart guys out in the marketplace that have been doing this for many years and that know exactly what they're doing. But most of those guys are not trying to help beginners. I'm just being honest. They try, they get frustrated by the fuckwits in the business, and they tend to move on. And so you end up with this situation, quite bluntly, of the blind leading the blind. That's the reality of most online discussion groups and most forums. So what we're going to talk about in this video series, and as I said, it's about 2 hours of content, so it's quite a lot of content, is we're going to have an introduction to the principles of training, the principles of nutrition, and the principles of recovery and lifestyle behaviors from a high level, from a 101 perspective. We're not going to basically walk away from this video and say that's all I need to know about these subjects. Hopefully what you can use it as is a template that you can then hold against what you've been doing to date, what you know to date, and then say, okay, well, that's really interesting. That doesn't necessarily line up with what I've been doing or what I thought I should have been doing. Or it does. If it does, fantastic. Just, my advice to you is just keep going. If you watch this video and you don't pick on, a number of points and go, well, I need to learn more about that, and I need to learn more about that, then, by all means, just keep going, keep training. You don't need me. But if you look at this video and it raises questions about the way you train or the way that you, approach nutrition or the way that you approach performance-enhancing drugs, then the whole idea is come back and then chunk down to the next level of detail where we branch off into each of these spaces and talk about what's required with some measure of detail. So 2 hours, we're going to cover some detail, but I mean, we can drill down 2 hours into each of these columns if we want to. And the first principle that I want to talk about here is the fact that we're going to talk about training in video 2. We're going to talk about nutrition in video 3, and we're going to talk about performance-enhancing drugs in video 4. But I want guys to understand that what we're really talking about here is we have this body of information about training that we need to learn about and then go away and execute. And then we have a requirement fundamentally for the same thing. This body of information about nutrition, we need to learn what do we need to do in terms of macronutrients, in terms of micronutrients, and we'll discuss that in this video series. And then we need to go away and we need to execute. And we need to then learn about performance enhancing compounds, hormonal enhancement, and then we need to go away and execute. But where the magic happens, where results come from, because most people kind of understand that concept, is what I call the intersection of the circle. Most guys that come to me usually are doing pretty good in one of these spaces. They have a very good handle on training, or they have a very good handle on nutrition, or they have a pretty good handle on hormonal enhancement. But usually they're heavily biased towards one or two of these circles. And that dramatically impacts on their outcomes. So I want guys to understand that there are areas that you need to learn about and areas you need to execute, but you need to do them all. Our goal here, up here, is this is about being good at everything that's required, just good, and not over delivering or becoming an expert at one area in the expense of the other. Now, so if you look at this from that point of view, there are industry experts, for example, that you would call them nutritional gurus, or there are guys that have a great deal of experience about performance enhancing drugs. I'll give you a classic historical example if you know this space. There was a guy called Dan Duchaine who was considered to be the first real steroid guru. He was a brilliant man, very, very, very smart, but also fucking batshit crazy. A complete fucking nutter, but a very intelligent man, yeah. But if you know who Dan was, Dan didn't execute. He was what you would fundamentally call a researcher. He knew a great deal about performance enhancing drugs, but he didn't go into the gym and seek out those outcomes. So he was a specialist in one of these circles. If you know a guy called Lyle McDonald, he's a very, very smart man. Again, maybe some personality problems, but that's Lyle McDonald. If you know him, that's who he is. But he's a nutrition expert. He doesn't do bodybuilding. He doesn't execute on all of these circles. He's a specialist in one of these areas. And the reason I'm explaining these things is if you want outcomes, if you want to be a bodybuilder and not a knowledge expert, you actually have to not just know about these things, but go away and execute them. And not just know about one of these areas, but go away and execute all of them. And that's the difference between you meet guys who are very knowledgeable. They tend to specialize in one field. They specialize in nutrition, or they specialize in exercise physiology, or they specialize in performance enhancing compounds, but they don't execute. And that's probably my strong card here in terms of what do I bring to the table and who's Victor Black and why should you listen to me? There are people that, I'll be honest with you, far smarter than me in each one of these disciplines. Absolutely. I have people that I listen to, guys that I consider to be mentors in each of these disciplines, but not one of them executes all of them. They're specialist nutritionists, they're specialist performance enhancing drug compound researchers, they're exercise physiologists. I'm a bodybuilder, I'm a competitive bodybuilder. I've been that all my life. And so my card is taking all of these things and then in a practical and real world sense, going away and executing them and getting outcomes that I think are good outcomes given my genetic limitations and my age. I'm 50 years old. You can only be the best version of you. We don't get to choose our parents, and genetics more than anything else will determine the outcomes that you will achieve out of this game. It's number one is genetics, number two is genetics, number three is genetics. Number four, we start to get into things that we can control. So I hope you enjoyed the video series. As I said, it's 2 hours of content, but every video you watch, please understand that my intention here is to provide value and education, and then give you a chance to come back and drill down further into each of these chunks. So if you watch the video on training and you go, I didn't learn anything from that, then you don't need to take on that module. If you watch the video on nutrition and go, I didn't learn anything from that, then you don't need to come back and drill down on that. And if you come back and watch the video on performance enhancing drugs and went, I didn't learn anything on that, you don't need to go further with the masterclass model that I propose. My masterclass is basically premised on the fact that you watch this video, there's enough valuable free content here that it sparks your interest. And you go, I need to know more about that, and that, and then come back and join us for the masterclass. Now, the masterclass is delivered in a similar format to this. It's $5 a week. So if you're interested in educating yourself and getting better at this, I try to price it at a point where everyone can afford it. Quite frankly, and I'm being honest here, if you can't afford $5 a week, you shouldn't be fucking around with steroids. I'm just being honest. There's a difference between someone that says to me, I don't see the value in what you're offering, Victor. I have no problem with that at all. And the guy that says, I can't afford $5 a week. My advice to you is to stop fucking around with steroids. Because things like blood work are really important. Blood work will cost you $100 every time you get your blood work done. And you should get your blood work done regularly. It's part of the process. So if $5 is going to kill you, if you go, I really want that information, Victor, but I'm not prepared to pay $5 for it, that's fine. All right? But don't fuck around with steroids. This is not a game for you. So I hope you enjoyed this video series. A lot of content. At the end of it, down below, you'll see a discussion area, so you'll be able to ask any questions you've got, follow-ups, and you can always send me a private message or an email. My email address is Victor, V-I-C-T-O-R, @muscleandiron.com. So Victor @muscleandiron.com. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoy the video series.